Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, managing editor for Shadowproof. Welcome to another edition of the Dissenter Weekly. It is August 26th. We have a full slate of stories for you. No shortage of material as far as whistleblowing stories. But before we get to the stories for this week, my colleague Brian Nam-Sonenstein here to give you some housekeeping items, and then he's here every week to help me get through these stories. So thanks for being here, Brian.
Thanks, Kevin. Glad to be here. Can't believe it's the end of August, suddenly out of nowhere. But here we are. I just wanted to remind people before we dive into the wonderful stories that Kevin has prepared for today, that if you like this work that we do, if you like what Kevin does, if you want to support the show and make sure that we are still publishing work at our website for the foreseeable future, we are 100% reader-supported organization, so you can go to shadowproof.com/donate, or we'll put up a link at the end of the show for Kevin's newsletter, which is another way to support us. And just make sure that wherever you're watching today that you like or subscribe or whatever you need to do to make sure that you get updates whenever we do these streams and put out other work. With that being said, let us dive right in here. Witness for Australian inquiry into war crimes in Afghanistan had home bombed. Why don't you walk us through this first story today?
Yeah, so this might seem odd to you. Unlike the United States, there are officials in Australia who seem to be making a decent attempt to look into and investigate war crimes that were committed by Australian military forces in Afghanistan, although they have retaliated, it would seem, or there is a bogus investigation or a political case against David McBride, an Australian whistleblower. There still is this inquiry that has been revealing many details from grisly acts that were committed by Australian special forces. And now we learn from an investigation by the Australia Broadcasting Corporation that a witness had their home bombed last November. This person is known as Captain Louise, and Captain Louise is a former special operations intelligence officer deployed to Afghanistan in 2012 and 2013. And they survived a blast at 3 a.m. that blew in the windows and left glass in the floor, ceiling, and walls. The New South Wales police apparently dropped the ball and never found any suspects. And so there's that, which is kind of staggering. No good job at all done in investigating who committed this act. And then Captain Louise says, I don't know how to describe the noise. It was shatteringly loud, and there was almost like three immediately following one another. Apparently 3 windows at the front of the house shattered. They each contained 2 panes of glass. We have wooden floors. It gouged the wooden floors underneath. That was embedded in the ceiling over 2.5 meters away. It was embedded in the ceiling, embedded all in the wall opposite. So describing the different pieces of glass that were spread through the house. And in some spots, the glass was powder. So something to set off this explosion. According to the Australia Broadcasting Corporation, Captain Louise is a person who was married to, or I don't know if they're with this person anymore, but was with someone in a special forces unit and that person in the special forces described details of a massacre that resulted in the killing of 13 people. So in December 2012, as they recap, on an SAS base at Tarankout, SAS being a division of special forces. The soldier spoke to her about how his patrol opened fire on a group of farmers in a field during an operation in northern Kandahar just after returning from a raid. And Captain Louise shares, and this is testimony that was given officially in the inquiry, he told me from his perspective what happened, which was that the patrol commander had accidentally shot one of these group of farmers. And then they made the decision that they couldn't leave anyone behind to tell what had happened. So they killed all of them. And he described the fact that there was a very young person, about 13 or 14 there. He described shooting someone as they hid within a tractor wheel, cowering. And I can't remember if it was the 14-year-old. To the best of her recollection from this conversation, I'm passing this on to the war crimes inquiry. And then, according to Australian and Afghan sources, ABC investigations found that at least 10 civilians were killed in this operation. So we have a war crimes incident, and this war crimes incident is one that was subject of this investigation. And now we have this actual incident where someone feasibly targeted a person who is a witness in the investigation. Absolutely traumatic, obviously, but also really serious. And we'll stay on top of developments. I don't know if anybody else has been targeted in this manner as far as the investigation, as far as this inquiry goes. But someone doesn't want an investigation into war crimes in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Kevin. Let's head into our next story here. We have Representative Ilhan Omar urges Joe Biden to pardon drone whistleblower Daniel Hale. Walk us through this one.
Yeah, so this just happened today, or the letter to Joe Biden is marked for August 26th. So this doesn't happen a whole lot of times. In fact, it's extremely rare for a member of Congress, let alone somebody in the U.S. Senate. You could never expect somebody in the U.S. Senate to stand up for someone accused of violating the Espionage Act, but you might get a person here and there in the House of Representatives who will stand up. And in the past, there's been people like John Kiriakou had Jim McDermott, I believe is his name, who had spoken up for him while he was in Loretto, and I think supported a pardon. But again, it's really extremely rare for this kind of a letter to be sent. And then in this case, Ilhan Omar is actually standing up for the act that Daniel Hale committed in much the same way that he stood up as a person of conscience and told the judge why he did what he did. She writes, Mr. Hale's release of information related to the drone program did not put any individual in danger. The information, while politically embarrassing to some, has shown a vital light on the legal and moral problems of the drone program and informed the public debate on an issue that has for too many years remained in the shadows. This information also provided concrete benefit to the legal efforts of Americans seeking to protect their constitutional rights against secretive and arbitrary watch listing practices. She notes before that the Obama administration declined to prosecute Daniel Hale, something we've talked about on the Dissenter Weekly, something we covered in our reporting through the Dissenter newsletter. And yet Donald Trump turned around and made this a part of his crackdown on whistleblowers. That's what Hale more or less expresses to Joe Biden in her letter. And then she mentions at the end that he pled guilty and took full responsibility for his actions. His motivation, as outlined in his deeply moving letter to the judge in this case, was profoundly moral. As you frequently say, so turning this to Joe Biden himself, the United States should lead not just by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. I implore you to read Mr. Hale's letter to the judge in full, and I believe you will agree that he was motivated by the same thing. Acknowledging where we've gone wrong and telling the truth about our shortcomings is not only the right thing to do, but also an act of profound patriotism. And then she goes on to say that the legal question of Mr. Hale's guilt is settled. As far as whether he broke some kind of a law, that was dealt with in this courtroom. But the moral question remains open. I strongly believe that a full pardon, or at least a commutation of his sentence, is warranted. It is precisely these cases where the letter of the law does not capture the complex human judgments in difficult situations that your pardon authority is at its most useful. And so it's a very strong letter. It isn't one that beats around the bush. And so this is good. As for where it goes, all I can say is we want to encourage people in House of Representatives and as well as the Senate to acknowledge the problems of prosecuting and bringing political cases against people with the Espionage Act and going after whistleblowers in this manner. And you have to start somewhere. And certainly she's one of those people you'd expect to be the first to step forward and be on the side of Daniel Hale. And, it puts Joe Biden on notice. It'll grab a few headlines today, although it seems to be buried in the continued crisis that unfolds with the evacuation in Afghanistan. But nonetheless, important for someone to speak up for Daniel Hale and say that he should be pardoned.
Thank you, Kevin. We're going to head over to the Senate now, where whistleblower oversight amendment has been stripped from that chamber's infrastructure bill. What happened here?
Yeah, this happened a little while ago, but I didn't get a chance to talk about it, or it was left out last week when I did the show. So there's the infrastructure bill that we've been following. Steve Cohn at the National Whistleblower Center put together a piece for the National Law Review. He describes a last-minute blitz that was sponsored by lobbyists for businesses that would profit from the over $1 trillion in spending, and they were, he believes, involved in killing a whistleblower oversight amendment that would have expanded the False Claims Act. This is a law that's been on the books for multiple decades. It's very useful for whistleblowers who want to go through some mechanism to bring claims of corruption. It's a way that they can actually take action. One of the few ways doesn't result in punishment for them going after fraud, waste, and abuse, so to speak. So he mentions that it aimed to address the negative impact of court decisions that have undercut the law, making it harder to prove that fraud is occurring in government spending. And in 2020, the amount of recoveries through the False Claims Act and somewhat similar whistleblower lawsuits hit a 10-year low. So a group of senators got together. They put together this amendment. The idea was to try to protect against the blacklisting of whistleblowers, limit the ability of the government to dismiss these whistleblower lawsuits without due process, and make changes to the standard of proof that was permitting government contractors, drug companies, and hospitals from profiting after it was demonstrated that they knowingly violated the law or their contractual requirements. In other words, things to reduce the amount of corruption going on with contracts that are given out to these people by government agencies. So subsidies that might be going to drug companies and hospitals. And a lot of this comes back to the way Medicare and Medicaid can function. And there are frequently lawsuits involving Medicaid and Medicare fraud, overbilling, etc. Statistics published on Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan's website explain that a conservative estimate of the amount of fraud in Medicare and Medicaid programs is $68 billion annually. More liberal estimates put that at $230 billion. In 2020, under the current law, False Claims Act prosecutions could only capture a small percentage of those frauds. So the idea is that there's a lot of fraud going on. People who care about taxpayer expenses and wasteful spending, etc. This is something that could be done and taken care of. These whistleblowers come forward and let people know that corporations are essentially benefiting from welfare, but welfare in the form of actual fraud. And so now we see that lobbyists were able to kill this amendment. Obviously we have no idea what the demise of the infrastructure bill will be, though probably will be passed ultimately in some form. It will not have any protections or expansion of this whistleblower law. It will have no reforms or nothing to make the False Claims Act stronger so that it could deal with fraud and abuse.
Thank you, Kevin. Let's move on to our next story here. We have a police whistleblower who spoke out against sexual assault in Louisville youth mentoring program alleges retaliation. What is this story?
Yeah, so I'll go through this, although not as familiar with this story as some of the other stories, but I think it stands out as something that we should highlight because this is a police whistleblower case. I'm not sure if it is true, but this officer, his name is, by the way, I believe it's either his first or his last name is Paul. I'll just refer to him as Paul. Paul, this officer who was part of the this Explorer program. It was a mentoring program. His name is Paul Paris, part of this Louisville Metro Police Explorer program. It's supposed to be something that's like a youth mentoring program with police. But what happened is it ended up being a way for officers to essentially engage in sexual misconduct, to be predators. And there were multiple officers who were accused of very serious and heinous crimes. And this program was ultimately shut down. The early part of the 2010s, it became a defunct program. And Paul says that he was the first to blow the whistle on it in 2013 on sexual abuse of minors that was ongoing. And his lawsuit is a whistleblower retaliation lawsuit seeking damages for treatment he endured in the police department as a result of speaking out about this sexual abuse against minors. I'm not sure. And in fact, this local news outlet that covers, it's going to be something he'll have to prove in court that he was really the one who originated these allegations, because this developed into a full-blown scandal in Louisville. And even the local coverage mentions that there are several police and city officials that are still accused in 7 federal lawsuits of concealing evidence of the conduct by intimidation, destruction of evidence, deletion of information, and the refusal to comply with the Kentucky Open Records Act, as well as conspiracy to cover up wrongdoing. But Paris argues that dozens of former Explorer members had been propositioned, molested, intimidated, or assaulted by officers. So those are the minors who were in the mentoring program. He says he knows that. So one particular officer, Officer Kenneth Betts, is actually in prison right now, serving a sentence for 16 years. He was found guilty of child pornography and enticement charges, also pled guilty to sodomy charges in a state court. So again, pretty despicable conduct that he was found guilty of committing against children. And, apparently Paul was someone who was speaking out about this. And what I do want to make sure I highlight is in this complaint that was filed, he describes the hostile work environment that existed at the police department while this scandal was erupting around the department, and mentions that there's a large whiteboard that was posted in the Louisville Metro Police Department Patrol Division, which was titled Rapegate. And on the actual board, I think they put all caps, but they didn't write the A and the P and the E. So it just had 3 asterisks in between. And it said, basically had the odds, like the over-unders for several of the officers in the department, and the odds that they were going to be indicted, and how many acts they were going to be accused of, whether they were going to be pinned as individuals who had committed rape or sodomy of any of these children. So really horrible thing that was done with this whiteboard. And Paul was on this. Paul was put on this and had an over-under, had odds for whether he was involved in committing sexual assault, even though there's no evidence and there's never been any allegations against him for being involved in this kind of sexual misconduct with anyone, and especially not in this Explorer program that we're describing. And so this basically amplified the hostility that was being dealt toward him as somebody who was willing to speak about what was going on in the department. It mentions that he did get named in a local news report, as somebody who was an advisor of the Explorer program, and that was false. But rather than correct the record, the police department went along with it, again, seeking to tarnish him through association with the elements of the police department that were guilty of this conduct. So this is a whistleblower lawsuit. He's seeking damages for what went on, the retaliation he endured. There's other allegations in the complaint, but I think that gives you a flavor of what really was going on here at the Louisville Police Department. And no, ultimately he left. Usually nobody who's a police officer who goes through this makes it and continues on in that work. It's just impossible with the culture to get it to reform itself. And so you will ultimately end up resigning, or you are forced out. That's exactly what happened with Paul.
Thank you, Kevin. Very important story. Next story we have here, a story you've been following for a while. Ag-Gag law expanded in Iowa creates new crime against audio and video recording. What do you have here?
Yeah, so this week, the story that I was able to get posted to the Dissenter newsletter went into some detail on some of the victories that animal rights groups and I'd say whistleblower groups, as well as I think journalism groups, can all champion, that the courts so far are seeing through what lobbyists for agribusinesses and the food industry, these factory farm boosters, they've been pushing this kind of a law in order to make it harder for people to do investigations of the way they are abusing animals, in particular, to go into factory farms and show how pigs, cows, any animals, the way that they're being mistreated. And so, and the horrific conditions, sometimes horrific working conditions, they don't want those to be broadcast. And they've come up with these laws called Ag-Gag laws. They've been something that we've covered. And actually, it was one of the first stories we did with Shadowproof. One of the first things that really got a lot of attention. One of the first posts I did when we started our site was on either an Ag-Gag law suit, a suit against the law, or it was about one being found unconstitutional. But either way, this is an issue that has been fought by groups for the last 6 to 7 years, at least, if not longer, really pushed by corporate lobbyists. The right-wing conservatives have pushed this. It doesn't have a whole lot of support from people within the Democratic Party, but obviously I'm not here to claim that they're doing anything to oppose this trend that is meaningful, but they aren't really involved in pushing this. It's coming entirely from those people who support the agenda of like ALEC, the legislative council that pushes these Chamber of Commerce friendly legislation on different states. So several states have these laws, but in several, at least 6 or 7 states, you've had rulings that they're unconstitutional. Kansas has the oldest law going back to the early 1990s, and it was ruled unconstitutional in the past week. Iowa, 50% of it was essentially found unconstitutional. So I don't know what that means for the law, but now it has to be sorted out. And then Arkansas, there's a lawsuit going, and an appeals court just cleared that to move forward against it as a civil lawsuit, basically to block someone from being able to use it, because there's a law in Arkansas that suggests someone could sue people if they are engaged in like an undercover investigation to try and uncover animal abuse at these factory farms. So now the thing that I really wanted to focus on, which I don't think has gotten a whole lot of attention, and I kind of buried it in my article because I was focusing on the court decisions, but this is something I think that is really important for people to note, is that in Iowa, what they're doing is not only are they defying the trend that says that these are unconstitutional laws, but they've gone ahead and created a new crime for people who are engaged in these undercover investigations, or who are, it could be potentially used against whistleblowers. It could be used against journalists. Recall that, like, first off, the history of muckraking journalism involves Upton Sinclair and the jungle and him going into a meat packing production plant or a meat production plant and actually documenting its state and what was going on. So this is going up against a tradition that is well protected under our First Amendment. And you have politicians in Iowa expanding and creating a new crime, making it a trespassing offense if you knowingly place or use a camera or electronic surveillance device that transmits or records images or data while the device is on the trespassed property. And it says a first offense could be an aggravated misdemeanor, which is punishable by up to 2 years in jail and a fine of $855 to $8,540. And then the punishment can get more severe. First off, this punishment is far more severe than the punishment for trespass. So they're already straying from the criminal code, and they're making this simple misdemeanor more severe than traditional acts of trespassing. And then it's pointed out that if you do it again, it can stack. So obviously they'll be able, and so in addition to that, as it's pointed out by the Animal Legal Defense Fund that is bringing this lawsuit, this is a unique crime that they claim would provide special severe deterrence for activities that form the basis of the Animal Legal Defense Fund's advocacy. And they've made speech an element of this new crime. So they're saying that, like, the act of recording is now a part of trespassing. And so it could actually be used to go after people who are recording in public places. You could be in a public place. A trespass could occur in any place where a person can be denied access. So, for example, one of the plaintiffs is a group of grassroots activists known as the Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement. They have been arrested before for trespassing while standing in open areas of legislators' offices, parts of businesses in which other customers regularly come and go, and construction zones open to the public view that are regularly traversed by workers and contractors or subcontractors. This new law means that if you record their activism, you could be committing a crime, because they are, when they get arrested, they are, they're guilty of being in a place where they're not supposed to be. They could be determined to be in an unlawful assembly, but then you're not allowed to be there. And so the person who's there filming that could be committing a crime too. It could be criminalizing journalism. So, I expect that this will soon be declared unconstitutional once it goes through all of the bureaucratic stages of typical lawsuits. It's unfortunate that resources have to be spent. This is extreme waste of taxpayer money. For all the talk of people who are supporters of these politicians in Iowa and anyone else who talks about fiscal responsibility, this is incredibly irresponsible, because this law should never be introduced and never pass, because somebody should look at it and recognize it has no chance of being upheld as constitutional as written. And the reason why it's guaranteed to die is because these people who back it can't censor themselves, and they continue to advertise the motivation for why they want these laws. And because of that, these courts are throwing out these lawsuits, and it's really fortunate for us that they're so talkative and open about how they want to suppress animal rights activists and go after whistleblowers. But just to say that this lawsuit points out that senators in Iowa, their state senators, say that they're supporting the bill to protect farmers and meat packing facilities. They state the bill was designed for the agriculture industry. One other senator says that it's about punishing trespass for surveillance of agricultural facilities, which he acknowledged. And it's also about stopping those with the mental acuity to go after you personally for agriculture. And so right there, it's already designed in a really bad way, guaranteed to be tossed out by a court, because it's viewpoint discrimination. They're already saying exactly who they're targeting. They're going to go after people who are anti-factory farm or anti-corporate agriculture, and the people who are pro could trespass. Basically people who are for agribusinesses could engage in whatever conduct they would like and are not going to be targeted because they're not deemed threats. So this is already destined to be ruled unconstitutional. We just need to set the clock counting down for when it will be in 2022 or 2023. But unfortunately, this isn't going away. And these people who want to do investigations and show us what is happening with our food and how animals are treated, and they are being detoured or intimidated and harassed in all of these states where these Ag-Gag laws are still on the books.
Thank you, Kevin. That was a great update. Why don't you round us out here with our Julian Assange update and go into talking a little bit about what's going on with the Dissenter right now?
Sure. There's not too much to say about Julian Assange's case itself. The appeal hearing, for those who have forgotten or maybe you don't know, it is at the end of October. It's on the 27th and 28th. There will be a 2-day hearing, and we will have arguments on the grounds of appeal that were put forward by the United States government. Again, it's up to the United States government to prove that the district court was wrong in denying the extradition court, or you have to show that the district court should have authorized the extradition request and made some kind of errors in judgment when it comes to the law. So we will see if that is the case. Although they've allowed that argument to expand into facts, we will be debating facts around mental health of Julian Assange and the risk of suicide for Julian Assange, and the conduct of the neuropsychiatrist that treated Julian Assange, whether he committed a mistake that is enough to toss out all the work he did assessing his mental health state. So that will happen in those 2 days. And I'll of course have very detailed reporting, likely be teaming up with Mohammed Almazi again. Maybe not, but we did work together on the last hearing, and I think our report turned out very well. We were each able to focus on different aspects of what happened and then bring people a really comprehensive report on the day's proceedings. But aside from Julian Assange's case, I want to make sure that you all are following the WikiLeaks account in the last week, because the WikiLeaks account has been putting up screenshots from documents that are in their archive, which show all this information we knew before the events that have been unfolding over the last couple of weeks, 3 or 4 weeks in Afghanistan, how we could have seen that disaster was coming, that the United States was not going to succeed in its objectives, whatever those were. And sometimes they were very murky, or sometimes they were entirely non-existent. But for example, the CIA Red Cell memo, that came from Chelsea Manning. It's a 2010 proposal, and it includes details about keeping troops in Afghanistan, suggests that the Taliban would reverse progress on girls' education. And so by using what could happen with the Taliban, they could make this a rallying point for France's largely secular public and give voters a reason to support a good and necessary cause despite casualties. So it talks about how to put that human rights gloss on the war effort in order to maintain support for what at that time had really developed into the forever war, recognize that it would likely have no end. And so there's a number of postings that have come from them. They remind people that DynCorp, this Texas company, was accused as their private security contractor. They're the ones that trained the Afghan police. And so far it looks like they didn't do a very good job, but how well were they going to be able to do might be another question. But DynCorp was described in this U.S. State Embassy cable, again, also disclosed by Chelsea Manning, of being responsible for child sex abuse, of bringing children in for officers and for police recruits, etc. Really horrible. And so that's something that they shared. So there's multiple examples of these coming from the WikiLeaks account that are good. And I wish that there were more reports out there. We should have less of these op-eds from people who are describing how the U.S. lost the war with their own opinions. And some of these are assessments by people who have no business telling us what they think about what unfolded. But those opinion articles should be less about what people's view are about what will go on next and what we should learn about the United States. It should be more about digging into these documents and the evidence we had before us that showed that we were all barreling towards this inevitable tragic conclusion. And these documents that WikiLeaks have shared color our understanding of what was going on, the immense corruption that was happening in this war. So that's really all I have for this week. Down below, we've got the Dissenter.org. This is the newsletter. I hope that you all are subscribers if you're watching, but if you're not, you go there. It's free. There is a paid subscription. There are exclusive posts that go out to people. There's material that you get if you're able to support and fund journalism on whistleblowers. I sent something out to people who are subscribers describing some of the things that are planned for the Dissenter going into the month of September. And I'll just take a minute here as we're concluding to share with you, for those who didn't receive that newsletter or didn't catch that went to people's inboxes. We are going to have a series reflecting on the milestone anniversary of it being 20 years since the September 11th attacks, and digging into some of the different aspects of the post 9/11 era. And this is obviously, we won't be the only site that does this. This is happening collectively. And some people are going to do a marvelous job of digging into the nightmare that we've been living under for the last 20 years of this security state. And others will be justifying it retroactively, making excuses for it, and trying to show that it was a reasonable thing for us to have mass surveillance and drones and these wars in 7 or 8 countries at a given time. But we won't be doing that. We'll be seriously reflecting on the war state and its expansion, and why it was, along with Afghanistan, part of the destruction and savagery and really degrading of this world in the past, the degradation of this world in the past couple of decades. And then pairing that political reflection, going along with the political reflection, I'm someone who really enjoys film, so I'm going to bring in a series and do a series on 9/11 cinema, so to speak. I'll just call it offhand that, and look at the way this transformation of our politics was essentially filtering down into the entertainment and affecting films, or the kinds of stories that were being told about this. Some of them might have been stories that were dissenting against these trends. And so I'll do it. And it won't be what you expect. I'm not going to pick the usual suspects. I've got a pretty good list of ones that can give us something to talk about and dig into and digest, along with that stuff that I described about, all we should remember about the drones coming and the war starting and the surveillance and the torture program and all of that. I think we should reflect on what this did for culture in the last 20 years as well. So that will be there at the Dissenter newsletter in September. And I encourage you to support it. A few of those posts likely will be exclusives, but not all of them. But, if you want to get all of them, support this work, support this journalism. And the next step for me with the Dissenter newsletters to go out to people again and try and bring on, one or two more people who can be contributors, who can make, to start off with, freelance contributions and see how their work does. And then, who knows, maybe at some point in the future, next year, a year and a half from now, we might have another person who is involved regularly with the Dissenter. I think it should be a collaborative newsletter eventually, but for right now, it is my own solo project. But it's part of the Shadowproof. It's part of what we're doing. And we can bring Brian back in here and say goodbye to you all. And
hello, everyone.
Still working on freelance pieces and doing what we can to get those up there. And there's another round that should be coming soon in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I've been very grateful that we've gotten so many pitches recently in the last month or so from really incredible journalists. So we're going through those slowly but steadily. And I think, the remainder of this year, the balance of this year, we should have some really great journalism to share with folks. No real updates at this very moment compared to prior weeks. We're still chugging away on some Marvel Cook journalism. I'm working with 2 writers incarcerated at San Quentin on some stories there that I'm very eager to share with you all. But of course, we have to do it all over mail because we can't email with people in prison. So as you can imagine, sending drafts of 10-page reports back and forth over the mail takes a little while, but we're putting in the work. We're happy to do it. And we're able to do it thanks to folks like you all out there watching who give a couple dollars a month, chip in when you can, whether it's shadowproof.com/donate or Kevin's newsletter. So thank you very much for that.
There's a few things here for people who have been watching. I just would like to answer. Yep. We have one person who asked us what happened to the Australian giving evidence. So far as I can tell, they're alive and fine. I think they were put into some kind of witness protection program. I believe that was part of the story, and I apologize for burying that information or not mentioning when I described it.
Whoops. I clicked that by accident.
Someone says 3 people watching, gotta be more. What is good? What is good is that we get a few hundred people to tune in after we do the broadcast. So for those of you who tune in live, understand that there are people who catch this show later. And then I share this with everybody who subscribes to the newsletter, who's paid subscribers to the newsletter. I take the time to put together something for them. And then there's a podcast version of it for people to listen to instead of, if they don't want to just sit and watch video for an hour, and they could have it and take it around and listen to it. But yeah, so I don't think it's just 3 people every week. There's a few hundred or so who are watching, and we'll continue to grow that number. And then let's see, as we, Rob had this for us. Rob's a great loyal supporter. I'll let him share his slight disagreement with our attitude on the Ag-Gag law, saying that he loves us, but I don't share your confidence that the Constitution can't be bent all out of shape for pervert billionaires. It feels like this is a bigger problem than is being addressed. How wrong am I? And, the only thing I'll say right now is I'm reporting what the state of play is currently when it comes to groups that are challenging these Ag-Gag laws. And thus far, they've had pretty good success in defeating them because of the way they're drawn up. Now, if at any point they want to become more sophisticated and find ways to not make it so obvious what their goal is with these laws, like, for example, we've got laws in this country that are clearly aimed at voter suppression, but there are ways that they can be drawn up so that they're not obviously declared illegal in courts. And that is devious and cunning. And so far, the people who are coming up with these laws can't seem to get around that thing called the First Amendment, because everything they conceive violates that, including, the fact that there is a universe, although it is very small, there's a universe of false speech that is actually protected by the First Amendment. As in, like, in some situations, you are allowed to lie, and you are not committing a crime when you lie. And so, like, you could get employment somewhere and not tell someone the full truth, and you may not be committing a crime in, necessarily impersonating like an employee. Like, you could be doing that undercover investigation. So thanks for that. That's a good question. And yeah, thanks everyone for the support. I put a video on the channel. I got a pretty good acknowledgement from WikiLeaks the past week. I was given a journalism award, and some of you who do watch the show, gave me some congratulations. So I'd just like to make sure that you all know that I appreciate hearing from you, and thank you. And we'll continue to do this show and work covering Julian Assange. Yes. And everyone say hello to Brian's dog,
who hears my wife outside and is howling.
who is excited to go for a walk, or
wants to probably. It's like 100 degrees here in Maine. So,
and you don't want to go for a walk because it's so hot.
She wants to go to the river. Yeah. Anyway,
because it's hot, she wants to jump in the river.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this week. Thank you for your support. Thank you, Kevin, for all the work that you put into getting this show together every week. And yeah, onward. We will be in touch next week. Same time, same place. Everybody take care.